Well, good morning, everybody. I think everybody's being invited on right now. It is it's an overcast day, overcast Saturday in Nashville. But I know many people are excited because it's football time in Tennessee. Actually, I think Tennessee's playing at South Carolina, and Vanderbilt's playing at Texas A&M. But SEC football has started. So we have our guest today is Council Member Thom Druffel, who is the chairman of our Education Committee. And Thomas, I told you we spend the first couple of minutes just kind of chatting, and then we get into it after everybody's had a chance to get on. So how are you doing this morning?
I'm staying alive, but football is a mainstay in our house. So we're on game day already, and that's where I'd be.
Well, so I'm looking at your shirt that you're wearing. Is there a particular team that you root for?
Okay, Notre Dame is the team. It's a whole family. It's our family team. We both grew up in the Midwest, my wife and I, and big Irish Catholic fan. So yeah, Notre Dame is our team.
And they've already started their season, correct?
Yeah, they squeezed through a couple, doing pretty well so far, and we're hoping they're ranked 7th. So,
but they're not. Are they not playing today because they have some outbreaks on their campus? Is that right?
Yeah, that's what I heard. And then our big game will be Clemson, so that'll be they're playing the ACC.
That's
so
right.
We're going to be looking good until we get to Clemson, and then we'll see how good we are.
I got it. Well, that should be interesting. So I was going to look before I got on this call at the schedule for what's being shown today. I will try to watch some football this afternoon. I got to mow the yard. I know that. And I know there's a event for Pastor Fuzz today, who is recovering from cancer. And there's an event for him today at the Ellison Place Soda Shop. Pastor Fuzz is sometimes a visitor on this call, and I'm glad he's doing much better. We did have some sad news this week. We lost 2 former council members. Councilmember Tony Tenpenny died of complications from COVID. And former council member Rip Ryman died. He had been fighting cancer for a while, and he passed away this week as well. So kind of a long week. Glad we're at the weekend. It is 10:03, so it's okay for us to start. So welcome, everybody. We have the chairman of the Metro Council Education Committee, Councilmember Thom Druffel, is here with us today. Thom, I usually go over just quickly the COVID numbers for as of today. 28,551 cases. That's an increase from 136 yesterday. We had 271 deaths, 3 deaths since yesterday. That 136 number is lower than we've had. It's a little higher than we've had sometimes too, but it's actually a lot lower than we had. So the numbers are doing pretty well overall. I know the mayor is lifting a number of the restrictions. I think October 1st, we go into kind of a phase 3 operation. So everybody keep it up. We're doing what we're supposed to. I know that people are interested in getting things opened up, but everybody needs to be careful because we're not at the end of this thing yet. So we don't want to have things go backwards. One other thing I'll mention is we have a couple of folks on the phone. Councilmember John Rutherford is on our call today. And Frida Player, who is a member of the school board, is on the call today. And we'll add anybody else on as people join on today. So anyway, Thom, thank you for being here this morning. Notre Dame fan, ready for football. Usually we start these things by just saying, hey, people don't know who you are. Tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you end up in Nashville? And how did you find yourself on the Metro Council?
Well, those are good questions. Number one is I'm a hotel manager by trade. Been doing this since, I was 15, so 54 years. Worked through my hotel career in many different cities. Started in Chicago and San Francisco and LA, Atlanta, DC. Worked my way up to manage a fair amount of hotels. I was a regional vice president of operations for Marriott and IHG and several groups managing hotels around the country. Eventually decided not to continue to follow that crazy life, and we moved to Nashville in 2002 after 9/11, and had the opportunity to sort of settle down in a community. I always whined about it would be nice to have a life outside of running around the country, and Nashville turned out to be the place for us, and we settled here, and it felt like home almost immediately. And kids and Margie have done a great job just falling right into Nashville, and we got very lucky to be here. So got here through the hotel business and really enjoyed it.
So I'll ask you about Margie, because we actually like her better than we like you.
Yeah.
So Margie, just for people watching, so when we were all together, Margie would make, it was whatever it was like banana bread and other things, and it would be back in the back in the little kitchen we have off the council chamber. And she was responsible for me gaining some weight before COVID, just letting you know. So anyway, we actually will start back together in October. The council will be coming back. And so I hope Margie is getting ready for that, because that's one of the main reasons why we called everybody back, was so we can have some of that bread, right?
Of course, her pumpkin chocolate is our favorite, and she's ready with it. In fact, she's got a loaf downstairs, and I got to stay away from it by all means.
All right. Well, just if you don't want it, just call me and I'll come over and get it.
Sure.
So we also have Council Member Courtney Johnston is on the call, and our Finance Director, Kevin Crumbo, is on the call. So welcome you all. So Tom, tell me a little bit about, besides just getting here, you've run for office before. Why the interest in this, and why the interest in getting on the Metro Council?
Well, I think historically, my underlying intentions around education really stemmed from being a big brother for kids around the country, Chicago, LA, San Francisco, seeing the opportunity and sort of the needs of some of these, and getting to know them personally, sort of generated an interest in education. So that became my underlying theme. I really felt like if we could solve that problem, we would change the lives of many. In fact, if you look at Nashville with 85,000 students, it's not only the 85,000 students, it's the families. And so you're taking a third of the city that would be impacted by a great education. So did that, and not only as a big brother, but worked with more at-risk youth over the years. That gave me an opportunity to really understand that personal involvement was a key. Community involvement was key. In Atlanta, for example, I was with a PAL program where you double the graduation rate with these at-risk youth. So we went from 41 to 83% at this target group. So being involved in the community supporters sort of got me interested in being involved in education. When I moved to Nashville, I got involved with as a volunteer through the Pencil Foundation and through the Chamber on the Academies of Nashville, which a lot of people might misunderstand, but it's thematic academies that sort of changed sort of the redesign or redesigned the high school system. I had the opportunity to be one of the first volunteers with Mark Hill and Star Herman to look at what we were going to try to do to improve high school graduation rates. So had the opportunity 15 years ago to be involved early on. We had a fair amount of success, pretty excited about it. And then as you learn the difference you can make there, how can you extend that difference through other areas? And so continue to work in that area, but also then Metro Council looked like a person or a place for me to maybe make a difference. There's a long story on how I got here. I wasn't never politically interested in government, but sort of got talked in it in a way that said maybe you can make a bigger difference if you tried it.
So tell me, go back to the academies. Give everybody an example if they don't know. What's a couple of examples of academy schools?
So most of the high schools that we have thematic academies, and if you think of academy, it's really not the same, but it's really have focus on particular career pathways that allow students to create more relevance to what they're doing. So if you can just picture yourself as a student in high school, like why am I learning math and English? Then realizing, well, if I connected the dots to create, a plan or do something differently, a marketing plan that has relevance, you tie project-based learning into relevant subject matter, and you create a greater dialogue and more interest on the students' part. It doesn't change the academic requirements. They still have the same class level requirements, but whether it's a healthcare academy or a hospitality academy, etc., it creates sort of a greater sense of interest that allows students to really connect. With that, we've raised about 300 volunteers and professionals that come into the schools and support them, whether it's engineering, medical, etc. And you can imagine, as a student, you meet a real doctor, you meet a real manager, someone that's in your field or you're interested in that field. It creates a whole new sense of connection and interest.
So this would have been like I think my nephew was at one at Overton. So they're just the high schools. They're just different places that these things are located, correct?
Correct. Most of the schools have 3 to 4 thematic academies. And so we have partners that connect to those academies. What most people don't know is we're now a national model. People from all over the country, actually all over the world, come here to actually study our model that shows the partnership and the alignment. We talk about alignment in Nashville. Whether Metro government is aligned with MNPS, the school board, and the chamber on the whole goal of improving graduation rates for high school. And it was we just discovered the idea. We didn't discover it. We developed it 15 years ago, and it continues to be very successful.
Okay. So I want you to go back again for something else. So you did a lot of work with these academies, and in fact, you won like an award from Metro Nashville Public Schools for your work with the academy, correct?
Yeah, we won a few awards, and I think it was a team award, but we got Pencil Foundation Volunteer of the Year and CEO Champions Award and stuff like that. And I feel like, and it was all of us, all the partnership chairs, all the people that were involved. You can imagine the amount of organization and involvement, but we have some great people that were dedicated to the success of this program. And completely aligned with Metro schools, who were very committed and did a great job of redesigning their schools to support this idea. And it came out really well, continues to do well.
And tell me one other thing, and then we're going to get into some of the questions that came up. So you have lots of connections to the public education system. You teach right now, correct? And then your daughter teaches, and your children have had connections with it. Can you give the viewers just a little bit more information about all the different connections you all have, your family has?
Yeah, I think, I personally, I'm a hotel manager and I've enjoyed that. But one of the things you learn is how do you create success in your employees? And I think, and then the greater public. And so I became a student, adjunct professor at TSU, building the hospitality program. And now we're in our 6th year. And really, it's a great pipeline from the high school academies to college. And now I chair their advisory board and involved in the College of Business Advisory Board. My daughter is a 1st grade teacher. She's in her 5th year. Her whole focus has been on teaching at-risk youth. She had chances to do different schools, and she's now at Mountain View, and she was at Jolton before. And I'm happy to say that when we went to her reading, we helped read at her class at Jolton. I think she doubled all her kids' reading scores. So we saw firsthand what we of course, proud of our own daughter is a good teacher can make a difference. My son's a special needs. We had a chance to work within the MNPS and Hillwood and H.G. Hill school system to understand how dedicated MNPS is helping special needs. We had some great teachers. So yeah, very, very involved in education. Personally, I feel like it's the biggest thing we do to improve social justice and the social aspect. When you take a look at a third of our city impacted by our school system, and how we can make a difference, it's sort of a critical need that we got to do. And secondly, I think the community is through the academy approach. When you get 350 business partners, that you give them a specific ask and a specific need, and they see the success. There's a great opportunity to involve our community to do something special.
All right. So one last question before we get into the main questions, and that is, and I thought of this, and I really wanted to ask you. So, you know, whenever I go to a hotel, I get those little bars of soap.
Yeah.
Are they all over your house because of what you've done? And, you know, are you not allowed to get shampooed? Is everything really small? Is that what you've got in your house?
Well, yeah, probably at one time we got some, but you know, the interesting aspect is purely from a green perspective. Most of us are going to green, which means you have bulk soap and shampoo in the shower, and we went to that at our hotel. And we had cases of soap at that time, and so fortunately we were able to give it to the right places. But yeah, I mean, yeah, we have all kinds of soaps in our house, and I was married 18 years. I think I still have some Marriott soap.
All right. Very, very important. That was an important question. Okay, yeah. So let's get into these things. So some good questions. One of the questions I thought was really interesting, and it was defined what you would define quality education, and then also define what it means to fully fund education. Let's start with the first one. How would you define quality education?
I think that's a question we got to get to. I think if we can improve, for me, it's improving our metrics to the point where we can get our reading scores up to above national levels. So if you were to ask me for a target, I would say let's start to expand beyond and dream a little bit higher. And that's a vague answer, I realize, but I think it's a ongoing question. Personally, I believe we have to do more. You know, when I look at reading scores at 33% or whatever number, 30 to 33%, and we say, well, let's try to increase it 10%. Well, that's still not a great number. So how do we dream bigger? So quality education for me is really looking at how do we make a greater difference? You know, for me, you know, can we get 2/3 to read at grade level? What are those, big changes we can make to make a difference? I don't have the answers, and that's where the school board and I think MNPS are the experts. I'm a business person that is more of a problem solver that works with groups to help solve problems. And I see my function and role as the chair of education to be that kind of person, not to be the expert. Had a chance to meet with the school board chair and vice chair this last week at lunch, and we had a great discussion. And as I told them, I said, you're the policy, you're the people that know education. How do we help you? And I'll talk more about that as we go, because I feel my job is to align the 4 aspects of our education system: MPS, school board, mayor's office, and the school and the Metro Council. And that's my primary mission, is how we do that. If you look at the chamber's report, in one of the big questions is, how do we set up accountability against all 4 areas when all 4 are impacted by education? It's a good question. I think talking to Chair Buggs and Elrod, they were in the same place where, how do we work together? If we know their mission as a Metro Council, and we have 11 on our committee, how do we then support the greater mission? And if we know it in detail, we'll be better at it.
Okay, so I'm going to circle the fully funded because I'm going to come back to that, but let me follow up on that question. So let's just, we'll just have this open, honest conversation about the education committee. Most of the, excuse me, most of the stuff that goes on with education within Nashville and Davidson County is taken care of by the school board. We have an elected school board, obviously Dr. Battle, head of the school system. So most of the work goes on there. And our education committee in the past has been there to handle certain things. They obviously, the Metro Council deals with the budget, but we also, when we come up with the amount of money that we're giving to the school system, we turn it over, and that's about what we do. They control it once they get it, and so we can watch it, but we can't necessarily do much about it. I think sometimes people think we have more authority than we do in terms of dealing with the school board. Having said that, what can we do? I mean, as in your role as chairman of education, you've just started. What can we do to make this thing work better? What can we do to, what leverage we do have, whether it's in terms of budgetary aspects or just holding some people accountable. What do you think our role should be in terms of the education committee, and what would be your goals this year in terms of trying to hit that?
No, that's a good question, because that's when I first got into this as chair, and I feel very lucky to be able to in that role. What can you do besides sort of the passive role we've taken as a Metro Council? And it isn't on purpose, it's just sort of the way that process has been. So my goal is to take a more proactive role and sort of getting to know and educating ourselves with MNPS and the school board to understand the overall needs. And I think if we do that, we have better support. So when we met, one of the things we're going to do that I've talked to Chair Bugs and Elrod, and my co-chair is Aaron Evans, by the way, for Metro Council, and we have some very dedicated people. So how do we have a greater conversation? When it gets to the budget, this is my first year and I'm on budget finance, I got to the budget and I go, I got 30 minutes or 15 minutes to look at a budget for a department of $1 billion. Now you can dive into it, but then you don't really know what it means because you see dollars and you see program. So what I had a great conversation with leadership of the school board was, what if we had monthly meetings to talk about specific issues that are drivers of the budget? Okay. What about having that? And they were in agreement with that general idea. And I sent it to our committee, and they're in general agreement. Instead of having a 15-minute meeting to pass legislation, now our goal is to truly understand the needs and support of what the school board is asking for MNPS. So when we get that my goal is when we get that budget, we're going to get a budget that we know the underlying meaning of that particular program. So if it's a reading or it's a program, a literacy, a social justice, whatever that is, we are going to be able to understand that whatever amount of money, $22 million is for something, we're going to go, we get it. So we're not sure what fully funded means, but we would like to get a sense of support for the ideas that come through, because we clearly are the budget approval aspect. We don't have line item, but we have to improve integrity. But I truly believe that if we understand everything in the budget that says this will do this, we will be much better at being advocates for MNPS budget and the school board's recommendations. So we're going to have monthly meetings. We talked about it. We're going to start work on it. I think the first one ideally is going to be on capital plan, not only understanding what the current needs are, because we know we're going to be limited, but what is the 3-year, 10-year plan for capital as a planning tool for the school, for Metro Finance. It gives us a much better aspect of then what do we have to look at? We know we're under the gun this year, but what are the long-term needs? that play in, and then how are they prioritized against the entire metro needs? And I think those are important conversations because is on the metro finance, we have to determine whether priorities are eventually. So those are some of the direction that I'm moving toward to change our committee. Council Lady Porterfield, she and I had a long talk. She was the former chair, and she was in the same direction until COVID and some other things hit. So I think we're pretty well aligned on the direction of what we want to do to have a joint conversation and really align ourselves at the budget time.
All right. So let me ask you this. So you're talking about obviously the leadership of the school board. One of the things that, and I've been on the council for a long time, as you know,
yeah.
But one of the things that I think was always missing was a better working relationship between the members of the council and members of the school board. And we've had this conversation before. I've had it with you, and I've had it with Council Member Porterfield and Christian Buggs of the school board. It's trying to figure out how we communicate better, with the understanding that there are, separations of power or authority between the two entities. And I quickly learned a long time ago, you try to propose something and the school board sends a message back and goes, no, we're responsible for that. But thank you. How do we develop a better working relationship? One way is to do exactly what you're talking about, and that is monthly meetings and conversations. But for the entire council and for the entire school board, how do we bring people together? What I would tell you is we just call a meeting, but it's a little bit more difficult right now. But how do you, in a pandemic, start improving working relationships?
That's a good question, and I think that's part of our target is we have a great start. I talked to Mr. Fisher at the mayor's office. He wants to be involved. Again, the school board leadership. I think our intentions will get us there. We will like to invite not only our committee, but anybody that might want to get involved or listen to program outlines that are going to need support when we get there in the budget season. So I think opening up to a dialogue, and I would even suggest opening it to a dialogue that opens up to the public, because the public is not aware of some of the problems of what we have. You look at out of school suspensions, et cetera, and there's 8,000 to 10,000 kids involved in that. And then you go, what's that really mean to Nashville long term? If you don't take care. Then you got restorative justice and some of the programs that I would suggest the school board could talk more intelligently, but I've seen, how do we correct some of this? And yet, what are the investments we need to make to really seriously solve the problems, not talk about or talk around them? So I think that dialogue, not only within the leadership of the Metro and school board and mayor's office, but also with the general public, as people understand the problem, I found that they're more passionate about trying to support whatever that is. One of the things I would have to suggest when I ran and I knocked on doors, a lot of people would say, well, I don't want any increase in taxes, but if it's for the schools, if it's for the teachers, we're okay. They see the problem. How do we communicate the really underlying issues? And the more you get to know, the more you realize it's a complex system. How many people don't speak English? How many people, migrate from, school to school? People don't understand it. As we create a more public dialogue and leadership can get around the solutions and aligned, if you align all four aspects, MNPS, school board, mayor's office, and Metro Council, I think we can do some great things.
Okay, so let me ask you some specific questions about performance, and then we'll get into the tax issue and the expenditures for schools. Somebody asked over the week, why do you think we underperform as a school system? And then the follow-up question will be, what policy steps can we take to start dealing with that? So first question is, why do we underperform? Why do you think we underperform?
I would imagine that You know, as I see some of the people like Frida Player that's on the school board and people that are the experts probably could speak to this better than me. I always found as a manager, you let the experts talk, but I would say in general observation, the problem is much more complex than we give it credit for. Everybody, you know, a lot of people just say, well, you know, it's about the teachers, it's about going to school. It's actually bigger than all that because, you know, like my daughter teaches and there's 5 other languages. You know, of course, now we have the problem not only with the language, but how to use computers, etc. So the problems are much more complicated, and I don't know if we've had solutions against the specific problems that occur. Example like migration factor, meaning that a significant number, used to be like 50 or 60%, and I don't know the current number, go from school to school. So you might be at this middle school this year and next year because the parents move because of jobs, etc. They'll be at a different school. How do you manage that level of learning where it transfers with you and you have first of all, new students, new friends, etc., and new teachers and new guidelines? I think MNPS did a good job of trying to standardize some of the guidelines, but the reality is those problems exist in an urban district like ours, and I don't think they're simple answers all the time. So I'm not answering the question per se, but I think that we underperform because I don't think we've done as the job we need to against some of the complex problems.
And I'm not sure if you, you know, should have put a caveat on it at the beginning to say, I'm not sure if anybody exactly has all the answers to why we underperform. I guess I would then take this a step further. So just based upon your experience and based upon your discussions and based upon the fact that, you know, you've had kids in the school system and you've got a daughter that's a teacher, policy steps. And again, understanding that the school board does most of the work on this. But what would you say, you know, if working with the school board from the council perspective, what policy steps would you think that we should be trying to look at or maybe take to make the system better?
One thing, I'm going to say this in general, I think focus a little bit, you know, what are the leverage points that give us the greatest impact? If we're restricted by finances, do we focus on literacy primarily? You know, what are the top 3 or 4 focus that will give us the greatest impact on the results? That doesn't answer your question because I think that creates a greater conversation with the school board and MFPS leadership. But there's a book called 4 Degrees of Execution, and it talks about how you solve problems, and that when we start to say we're going to address every problem and solve every problem, we rarely do. And they studied, you know, 30,000 organizations. But if you focus on the problems and the ones that have the greatest leverage of success, you can succeed. So they say 3 to 5 is approximately, you can solve 3 to 5 top level priorities and goals. If you try to go 10, 15, 20, it doesn't really work because you dilute your solutions and your work. So I think, can I give you exactly what policies? No, I'd like to hear from the school board and then see how we focus on the top policies that have the greatest leverage points. So again, I hate to be this vague comment, but the reality is I am not the expert. I'm the person that hopefully pulls things together that can help us create dialogue and focus on, based on experts, what is the top three policies or 5 policies. Personally, I think one is around literacy, and when you look at you know, and I get a lot of students as in high school, et cetera, is working with the academies that can't read or write to the level that needs to. That becomes a pretty big deal. Then I get some in TSU at Tennessee State, and you look at it and go, that's an issue that becomes very difficult to address later. So to me, literacy, reading, writing fundamentals are key. math's extremely important. But if you can't read and write, you really have struggles your whole life. And there's a correlation, of course, with issues. Restorative justice, how do we solve the problems with some of the kids that just didn't get the right, background and need help? Kicking them out of school is not the way. So, two of those, and you got 8,000 to 10,000 kids that are in that world. How do you work against those kind of issues? And so, two of mine would be those in terms of policy, but I wouldn't set the policy just because I think those are concerns, and I think those are important points. But there's experts to tell us about that.
All right. So let me ask you this, and you've talked about it a little bit, but let's say you mentioned the book, and then let's say that we did something intriguing, and you work with the school board, the education work with the school board, and we looked at it and said, okay, let's pick the 3 things that we want to focus on this year, because there's lots and lots of problems. We got that, but let's focus on 3 aspects, and let's deal with them. All right. So the question is, how do you get everybody in alignment to do that? One idea is obviously you sit there and have these discussions, which you're talking about having on a monthly basis, but how do you get everybody aligned so that we're all working on the same thing and we're all heading in the same direction?
Well, I think the question is absolutely right. It's not been easily done before, but I really feel like everybody I've had a chance to talk to, whether it's the school board or Dr. Battle or Mr. Fisher in our committee, they have the same interest. We all want improvement, and we care about our kids and students. I think when the facts become clear, in business, if you can show the facts that have the greatest contribution, and there's a correlation, you can rally around those. There's probably different conversations on what the priorities are, but to me, that's the value here. If we did land on 3, I don't know if that's the right number or if that's even the way you're going to go from the school board perspective. But if you do land on whatever that is, having that very objective conversation, public conversation, the more facts that enter, generally the better decisions that are made. So, again, my goal is to present as much information that has relevance and facts to support whatever policy that is. If it's a literacy program, how do we improve reading? Then what are the best practices? In business, we always look at benchmarking against the best practices. The first thing we look at is, let's go out and see who's done it and succeeded. And then you take it and bring it back. And I would like to think that's going to be part of our conversation. So it's not just a very casual conversation, but a very focused conversation on this particular item. And with that conversation, we generally, the facts will hopefully percolate to being the right ideas to create policy.
Okay, so once you, if you were to come up with something, whether it's 3 things or 1 thing or whatever, then you got to pay for it. Okay, so I guess the rest of this conversation today will be about funding. We've talked about fully funding, sort of the parameters of what that means. Let's say that you get people aligned. So I've got kind of 3 questions. I wasn't sure really which order, but I'll do it this way. So let's say that let's just pick a number. Let's say we had $50 million of money that was going to go, new money that was going to go to the school system. Okay, we don't right now, but we'll get into that in a minute. But from your standpoint, if all of a sudden we had $50 million to go to the school system, and I know they control it once we give it to them, but based upon your experience, where would you think that money should be directed? What would you do if you were head of the school system, got $50 million in additional funding? Where would you put it to make a difference?
Well, good question. I go back to reading. How do we build grounds up more improvements in reading and writing. Because again, a fundamental skill, no matter where you are. Second thing is again, these 8,000 to 10,000 students that struggle. What do we do to support them? Do we need more counselors? Different technique. Again, restorative justice ideas are really there's some success to those. So the two of those would be my top priorities. The third one would be the teachers, and what do we need to do within the school system to support getting the best teachers. From what I've seen in my own personal experience when I was a kid, I remember my best teachers. 100 years later, I'm here and I can still remember Miss Noiser at fourth grade teaching me my math tables and multiplication. And so I think those things go a long way. So how do we build the best teaching core, that we can? And to me, those are the three things that I would find of the greatest value. Whether they're in the right level of priority, it's probably teacher first. But to me, those are the things that are personally, I think, by observation, the biggest drivers. The one with, again, kids that get into trouble a little bit. Are they, that's still 10,000, 8,000 to 10,000 children that we could deal with, not turning them around into, graduates. That's a lot of children that we sort of have given up on. So those are the three in top of mind. That would probably create a greater conversation with experts, but again, that's my opinion.
Okay, so so let's let's get into discussion about the recent property tax increase by the council, and then this referendum that now in the court system. But depending on what happens, will either show up or not show up at some point on the ballot, which basically rejects the $330 million that the council passed to get this budget squared away. So talk to me about your feelings about the property tax increase and your overall feelings about what the referendum is doing, which is, I think most people on the call would understand what it is. I mean, the referendum, if it were to pass in the format that it is now, would basically take away the $330 million that the council put into the budget, and would cause some serious ramifications. Some people may say not, but some ramifications obviously on the budget. Once you go through property tax increase, and then what do you think about the referendum that you can say?
As you suggested, let me talk about property tax increase. Number one, we needed one. Two, I don't know if we needed 34%. We made the mistake of the past not having enough property tax increase that sort of got us in this situation. Primarily was against it simply because I felt like there potentially were more cuts that we could have made before we got to it. And I think we should have done a little bit more, but I was completely for some increase. And by all means, when you start to get to know the depth of the problem in our finances, the funding balances, et cetera, you recognize there were some significant issues. So by all means, property tax had to improve or had to go up, but I felt like, hey, we need to do a little bit more. For example, some of the, as COVID hit, people are still working at a full level within metro government. I don't take that against them, but the reality is most businesses and companies have to lay off or make tougher decisions. And I sort of felt like, maybe we should have been an example of making those kind of decisions. So that's why I was one of 8 to vote against it. It's a hard one because it's a culmination, that tax increase is a culmination of some financial problems over the last 10 years that sort of percolated up and were exacerbated by COVID and tornadoes and stuff like that. And not tornadoes, but COVID. So we saw the impact on all this. So that's my take on tax increase. Two is this referendum. completely understand the intentions, frustrations by taxpayers that see this happen at a time that is tough when people are losing their businesses, not working, and we're asking them to pay 34% more. Very difficult. But then we're getting into extremes. 2% is too much at a point where we only have half the year to in sort of get it going or to make it work. If I understand all the numbers from Mr. Crumbo, the numbers are staggering in terms of impact. So yeah, I'm very concerned with the referendum, not the intent of what they're trying to do, but with the detail. I think there's alternatives to address it. We passed a debt policy revision asking Mr. Crumbo to go back and look at debt policy that might be more structured and limiting to controlling our debt. And so if you look at debt policy, and as an example, if you look at debt policy around the country, like Mecklenburg County and stuff, they have caps and they do things that sort of have more structure to not allowing more debt. Our debt goes from 8% back in the 2008 timeframe to 14 and 16 to 18% soon as a percentage of operating budget. When you get to that level of debt, you're losing control of budget. So my answer partially is I think that as a Metro Council, we should be doing these things, and I get the idea that the patience is out. We're impatient. Do something about it. And so my hope is that somehow we can, maybe as a council, come up with some ideas that would follow the intentions, but not be so extreme where we have to have serious impact on so many areas that, whether it's the schools or et cetera. And Mr. Crumbo, I see is on, but I've asked him for the total dollars on education impact. And those numbers, we can't afford those numbers, I would expect. We're behind because of COVID and having to do virtual learning. I know we're behind getting our kids educated. We lost time in the spring. We're losing time now. We can't afford to go backwards. So purely from, the intentions of the referendum, I get it. But I think we could address it in a much more proactive way. And I think we should have by now come up with much better structure against sort of financial policies, oversight, et cetera, of what we're doing.
All right. So, you mentioned the impact, and you may not have all the numbers, but tell me and tell people watching if the referendum were to pass, and I know we've got court actions and other things floating around, but if the referendum were to pass as it was drafted and submitted to the clerk's office, just hypothetically, just move the court actions and the other discussions out of the way. But if it got on there and passed, what is your understanding of what the impacts would be to the school system?
Well, if we understand in general terms, it's over $300 million impact. If you purely take a look at 38% of our budget is school, and if that's the direct application, approximately 40% of 300 is 120 million. I don't know if that is the way it directed, and Mr. Crumbo would probably be able to answer that better. But the reality is, that's pretty significant. How do you absorb that kind of impact when you're already behind in education and simply because of COVID, and then you're behind on trying to do some of the focused things we would like to do? That impact's pretty significant if it translates that way. Even if it's a smaller amount, I can't. If it has anything in what I would think the amount is impact on education, I couldn't support that simply for that reason. We can't afford. I go back to the fact that a third of our city, is affected, whether 85 million or their families are affected by this. Their livelihood, their careers, their hope, their futures are all affected. I can't see that I just couldn't support the impact that would have on us.
All right, so let me ask you, I'll ask you a shorter question and then maybe a longer question. First question is, because we do get this, people come up and ask us every so often, what is the most important thing that our city does? In terms of the issues, what's the most important thing that we are responsible for in this city? And it can be more than one.
Yeah, to me, there's two fundamental things that a government should do is life safety, and we now education. So to me, those two, and then you got third is maintenance, which would be public works. So those would be the top three. Life safety would be number one, just because the safety of our citizens is key. Two is responsibility for educating our next generation is critical. Whether it's manpower planning, I've been on some manpower planning committees, et cetera, that talk about our long-term successes is we have the jobs. We just need students that come out that will be able to fill those jobs, that are academically ready and that side. And of course, third is making sure that we have the streets and taking care of our neighborhoods. So those would be my top three.
So I think we agree with each other. So it was always, education is the most important thing that we do in this city, and I always understood that. And then I started thinking about it, and it was like, well, wait a minute, what about making sure our public is safe? And it was like, if we can't keep our public safe, then how do we educate our kids? They kind of all works together, and then you've got the infrastructure and maintenance of our city. So I've always kind of understood that that's our responsibility. That's what, we have to understand as we go into issues like the budget and everything else. Okay, so having said that, and listening to what you said, what would you say, without trying to be too difficult, but if you were talking to people who are listening, who signed the petition on the referendum, as chair of education, what would you say to them to say, this is what I've seen in the, in your case, you didn't vote for the tax increase, but as chair of education, you're obviously responsible and concerned about what's happening with our education across the city. What would you say in terms of just having a discussion with somebody who signed the petition and said, we want to take away all the money? What's the discussion like? And I'm not asking you to, give me 3 points. I'm just saying, what's your discussion? How do you have a discussion with people who may disagree? So you kind of explain from your standpoint the importance of education and what happens if there is obviously a significant cut in the city's budget.
I think you got to translate it into real impact. To say you're going to take away $300 million from the metro budget, for example, doesn't mean anything to anybody. Everybody goes, yeah, I'm paying more taxes. We got to do something. When you get specific and identify the specific things that would be impacted, in my mind, for example, we would have to do something to schools, and people are pretty sensitive to taking care of their schools. If you had to take away, trash pickup, or we wouldn't be able to fill potholes, all the things that are specific to our ability to operate as a city, the top three priorities you and I sort of agree on, that changes the equation a little bit. I think the detail, the devil's in the details to understand the impact. The second component of that is trust. I think a lot of people don't trust the numbers in some cases. It's not against Mr. Crumbo in any way. They just don't trust government in some fashion. And some of the changes we've made, whether because of COVID or sales tax increases, all those things become less credible. And so One is, I think, identifying specifically what is going to be impacted so they understand. And two is making sure that there's some kind of level of reliability, credibility, so that they understand this isn't a guess, this is real. And so I think that's really important. As a person new to government, you look from the outside in and it looks like a big black box and you don't know how it's made. And when decisions are made that seem contrary to what you think are the right direction, you feel like something's wrong, and you don't trust it anymore. And a lot of us ran for not, for financial oversight and accountability and transparency. And I think that's really an important conversation that we have, so there is a cleaner sense of what that is.
Okay. Well, and obviously, I don't think any of us, when we ran, realized that we were going to be running into a pandemic that, that was going to cause even more significant issues and concerns to the city. Just an extra piece of this whole thing. Well, we are basically out of time. I think it's 10:57. Anything else you want to say before we end this call?
No, thanks for the time. I think to me, this is probably the most important area. Clearly, I'm involved in education. I would finalize that as a community, I think we can do more when we can identify very specifically what we can do. Tennessee, there's some community achieve schools, and when you start to see the community partners step up, knowing that they can identify whether it's time or money, they step up. And I think there's this vague need, but as we detail that, we can do a lot more. And we have, I think, I've lived in 15 places around the country. Nashville is the place that cares the most. So I think as a city, we have a great opportunity to capitalize on tremendous talent and support in our communities. And that's another aspect.
Well, Council Member Druffel, thank you for being my guest on the show today. Again, Council Member Druffel is the chair of the Education Committee for the Metro Council. Good luck bringing everybody together. I know that's been difficult, but I think it's the way to do it. A lot of important things going on in the next several months, and so just hang in there. I will tell you all that Judith Tackett, who is with Metro Social Services, who is the person who's the lead on homelessness issues within Metro government, she will be our guest next week. Should be really interesting. I will tell you that I talked to Judith yesterday. There's always issues going on concerning the homeless. I'm a big homeless advocate. We have been pushing to make sure that we have a winter plan in place. As you know, it's nice outside today, but we're at the end of September. November is not that far away. And typically we have a winter plan. This year is a little bit more intriguing because some of our partners can only go at half capacity because they just can't get a lot of people in because of the pandemic. So it's much more important this time to have an understood plan up front. So that should be an interesting conversation. Again, Councilmember Druffel, thanks for being my guest. Have a good rest of the weekend. I don't think Notre Dame is playing today, so you'll have to watch the SEC. I could be wrong, but you'll have to watch SEC football. All right.
Go Doors. All
right, there you go. Everybody be safe. Have a good rest of the weekend, and hopefully we'll see everybody here next week. All right. Thanks, Tom. And again, everybody have a good weekend. Signing off.